All right. Thank you for joining me on this episode of The Gospel Truth. I'm your host, Martin Wilson, and we have another great one for you today. I have an interview for you today. I have Pastor Doug Wilson with me, and we're going to be talking about reforming marriage. This is an important topic, and as you know, The Gospel Truth usually has debates, and we talk about theological issues, things like that. But today we're going to be talking about some Christian living, right? How should you treat your wife, or how should a wife treat her husband? How should a husband and wife deal with their kids? So those are the type of things we're going to tackle today. So I thank you for joining me. As you know, The Gospel Truth is engaged in the culture of Christian truth, and we do that through debates, interviews, and Bible lessons. And we have a whole bunch of shows coming up here in the future. But before that, before I go over to some of those shows, I do want to encourage you to go ahead and like and follow The Gospel Truth. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you can stay in the loop with The Gospel Truth has going on. All this content is not only on Facebook and YouTube, but it's also on Instagram and Twitter. So make sure that you are flowing over to Instagram and Twitter and subscribing and following there. All this content is also on podcast, so make sure that you are doing what you have to do there to stay in the loop with The Gospel Truth on the podcast as well, man. Appreciate your support. Please make sure you're subscribing and leave a good rating while you are there. Also, we have a whole bunch of shows coming up here in the future, so let me go over a couple of those shows real quick. All right, coming up March 22nd, I have Pastor Mike Winger, and he's going to be joining me. We're going to be talking about the dangers of the Passion Translation of the Bible. All right, so we're going to look forward to this one. Mike Winger's a real cool dude, so I'm excited for this one. I can't wait for him to come on and give us a rundown on this topic. Then after that, I have a debate. Is God necessary for morality? Eric Hernandez versus Robert Stanley. And that's coming up March 27th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then after that, I have Dr. Stephen Boyd's going to jump back on. He just recently had a discussion with Pastor Josh Scott, and we're going to be talking about, he's going to be talking to a Muslim, Nazim Ghaffar, and he's going to be talking about, is the New Testament reliable? That's coming up Tuesday, March 30th at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then lastly, I have another debate. Does evil disprove the God of Christianity? It's going to be Samuel Neeson versus D.B. Ramsey. That's coming up Thursday, April 1st at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time and 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So that's the next several shows coming up here on The Gospel Truth. Make sure that you like, subscribe, do what you have to do to stay in the loop with The Gospel Truth so you don't miss out on any of these shows. With that said, I do want to introduce my guest, should I say, as if he does need any introduction. His name Pastor Doug Wilson. He's a conservative, reformed, and evangelical theologian, pastor of Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho, and he's a faculty member at New St. Andrews College and a author and speaker. Some of the book he has written, man, he's an avid writer who was talking about it earlier. I'm trying to learn from him how I can be more consistent in my writing, man, because I want to write 100 books like Pastor Doug Wilson has written. And he's written books titled Future Men, where I think he's talking about raising young men, why children matter, when a man comes around, which I think is it's either Productivity or this title. That's his most recent title, I believe. And like I just mentioned, he wrote another book called Productivity. I have that book, very helpful in regards of having a rhythm about how you go about things, how you take their things. Everything should not be just chunked in and done in one day. It should have a repetitive action to it. But he's a great guy. He actually, if you remember, he also came on and debated Dr. Kurt Jarris, and that was an exciting debate. I will be posting that debate, the link to that debate, in the live chat. So that said, let me bring in Pastor Doug Wilson. How you doing, Pastor? How you doing?
Thanks for having me. Great.
Good.
Thanks for the invite.
Oh yeah, definitely, man. I'm glad you were able to take time at your schedule to join me and to tackle this issue of reforming marriage. Marriage is a cornerstone of the Christian faith, and it's something that's obviously highly looked on when it comes to how the Lord looks at marriage. And we see throughout the Bible the metaphoric use of marriage as God deals with Israel. We see this all throughout the Bible. So marriage is obviously a key concept when it comes to the faith in Christ. So I just wanted to bring you on so we could tackle some of these concepts of what reforming marriage is. We could start there. So what exactly is the idea of reforming marriage?
So I would say the central idea of reforming marriage is that marriage does not exist for the happiness of the husband or the wife. If the Westminster Shorter Catechism is right when they answer the question, what is the chief end of man? The chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. If that's true of man, if that's his chief end, then that must be the chief end of marriage also. So the chief end of marriage is not a happy husband, is not a contented wife. The chief end of marriage is the glory of God.
All right, all right. I mean, I think if we have that goal in mind, the goal of glorifying God in our marriage, I think that we will be able to have stronger marriages. I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the current statistic in America, so they do these statistics and they don't really dive deeper into who's really following Christ. They kind of just say, do you consider yourself a Christian? And if you consider yourself a Christian, are you married or you divorced? So they do these ratings, but they have this idea of a 50% statistic that of divorce rates, and it's incredible.
So that's really interesting. That's really interesting because years ago I said something to that effect of what you just said, because it's one of the statistics that floats around. I was teaching at a conference, and I'd mentioned that in the talk that Christians don't do very well at marriage either, because that was the divorce statistics for within the church. And the other gent who was speaking at this conference with me, a Presbyterian pastor named Rob Rayburn, addressed that. He corrected that. And he said, in the marriages that I've officiated at, where the people were faithful church members, they were, read the Bible, they were plugged into the church. He'd done a lot of weddings, and he said the divorce rate among the people that where I've officiated is close to that. And I thought, And I came back from that trip, and I've done quite a few weddings also. So we counted up as many as we could assemble, and the divorce rate was something like south of 5%. Right. So if you're talking about people who are serious Christians, who respect the Word of God and whose main goal is to glorify God, they're going to have a better marriage. But the reason they're going to have a better marriage is having a better marriage is not their goal. Right. So it's sort of like if I love Christ more than anything, my wife is going to get better treatment than she would if I loved her more than anything.
Right. Yeah, and and that's one of the things I was telling my wife when my wife, she asked me, she's all like, we having those conversations before we got married. We have, why do you love me? What is it about me that you love? I said, well, I love the fact that you love God more than me, and I love God more than I love you, and this is, obviously within when we're engaged, when we're talking about getting engaged and things like that, so it's vital important that it's not something that is, something that's cultivated when you get married, but something that's cultivated earlier, so when you do step into marriage, it's absolutely foundational. If Christ is number one and your spouse is number two, that means you're walking in fellowship with the source of all love. Right? If your spouse is number one, you're disconnected. You're an idolater, and that means you're disconnected from the source of all love. The appliance isn't plugged into the wall anymore, and that's why it doesn't run very well. Right. Makes sense, man. Makes sense. So let's talk about the book, Reforming Marriage, a little bit. Right. Let's dive into that a little bit, because there are some things in there, some people in today's culture, because you also talked about, and you talked about in the book about how the feminist culture has stepped into the church and sort of has ruffled the foundation of what the authoritative ladder is, if you will, of the man being the head and the woman being a helper of the husband. So as far as you spoke about authority, I wanted you to dig a little bit to that. How, as a Christian, within this culture, how do we handle that aspect of being able to have our wives be submissive to us and us loving our wives and our wives respecting the husband? What are
Right.
some of your thoughts there?
Right. So when I wrote Reforming Marriage, probably 30 years ago, or a long time ago, um, uh, headship and submission in marriage was not very popular, right? And I note that in the book. Now, today, it's probably illegal in some, in some
Right.
states. Uh, things have gone to pot so badly and it's because we didn't pay attention back then and didn't shore up our commitment to what the Bible actually says. And so one of the basic things that I think we have to get after is in the Bible, the husbands are told to love their wives, and wives are told to respect their husbands. Now, it doesn't. I like to illustrate this with couples when I do pre-marriage counseling by saying that husbands run on diesel and wives run on regular, or the other way around. Men and women run on different kinds of fuel, and it's the husband's responsibility to see to it that he's loving her, and it's her responsibility to see to it that she's respecting him. That's fundamental because that's what the Bible says to do.
Indeed, man, and I guess in this, because I've talked to friends and family, like I've talked to individuals who may be having some marriage issues, and when I introduce the idea of a woman being submissive to her husband, it's boom, it's an explosion of emotions, because a lot of time it's not understood what's meant by it. It's not this idea
Right.
that I'm man, you're woman, shut up and sit down and be quiet. It's just that the authority that God has created, how God has created the structure of marriage, and
Yeah.
and that brings me to another question that I have, because you also mentioned this in the book, the importance of the creation order as it concerns marriage.
Right.
So if you don't mind going into that a little bit, what are your thoughts about the creation order and
Sure.
how it correlates to marriage?
So God created man first, and the Apostle Paul argues from this. He says man was created first, not the woman, and he says basically the man was created for the garden to tend the garden, and the woman was created from the man in order to tend the gardener. So man has a task in the world, and the woman has a task in attending to the one who has the task in the world. He needs a helper. And so the way I illustrate this is if you imagine a book written by a guy for a male audience, what's the book about? If you imagine a book written by a woman for a female audience, what's the book about? Well, and it can be a paperback Safeway novel, throwaway novel, or it can be great literature. It can be The Odyssey by Homer or a Louis L'Amour Western. It can be Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, or it can be, a Gothic romance, right? So, but it's the same with whether it's great literature or not. In the book written by a guy for men, the book is about the mission. The book is about getting the gold back, or recovering the cattle, or winning the battle, or winning the war, or finding the treasure. Okay, that's the book is about the mission. And when a female character comes into the book, let's say in a Louis L'Amour Western, she's the plucky rancher's daughter. She comes in from the side to do what? Well, to help him get the gold, to help him get the cattle back, right? So that's how men think, right? That's a creation. It's embedded into us by creation. With women, if you read the book, the relationship is the plot. First, they notice each other, then they don't like each other for a while, and then they get back together, and that's the book. That's the plot. The relationship is central. So the woman's focus is much more focused on the relationship. How are we doing? And the man's focus is much more on how's the business doing? How's my job doing? How's the backyard doing? How's this doing? And of course, he wants to love his wife as Christ loved the church, and he wants to tend to her, because if he doesn't, then she's not going to be equipped to help him with the task that God assigned him in the world. But men are called to a vocation in the world, and women are called in their vocation to a particular man.
Interesting. So, okay, so that vocation, is that also allotted to being a homemaker? So, because obviously, once again, we jump into the culture that we live in when it's concerning marriage. Is it this idea that women are to stay home and care for the home and the children, or is it that women are allowed to venture out and pursue a career?
Yeah. I would divide that question. That's a great question. I would divide it in two. The way I put it this: I don't believe that a woman's place is in the home, but I do believe that the woman's priority is the home.
Right.
Right.
Makes sense. Okay.
Right. So, if you look at the famous passage in Proverbs 31, that woman is home centric. Right. She is centered on the home, her activities around the home, but she's like a merchant ship bringing goods from afar. She shops. She considers a vineyard and buys it. She's a manufacturer. She does a bunch of things that are not necessarily in the home, but it's all home centered.
Yeah.
All right. So if a man is married to a competent woman, a competent, hard-working woman, and they either don't have kids yet or their kids are in school, let's say, he goes to work in the morning and she does her housework and she's done by 9:30. Right? Now what does she do? Well, I think that she should busy herself with things that are not limited to the home, but that are related to the home, because her orientation to home is different than his. And this is the thing that is killing us. We think that men and women are equal in the sense of being the same. They're equal before God. They should be equal in a court of law. They should be equal in all kinds of ways, but the equality does not mean sameness, right? And so men want different things than women do. Men are oriented to the home differently than women are oriented to the home. Men are oriented to their kids differently than women are oriented to the kids. Everything is different. Men and women are completely and utterly and entirely different from the tops of their heads to the bottom of their feet.
And that brings up another point that you mentioned in your book about men being hard. You said
Yes.
that a man needs to be hard for his wife. And I think I don't want to misrepresent what you said, but I guess I was trying to gather understanding of that. I think I might have missed that a little bit while I was listening to it, your explanation of that. So if you don't mind, could you go into that a little bit? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, not at all. The distinction I was making is a man should be hard for his wife, which is very different than being hard on his wife. Okay, so he should be, if you go back to Genesis, the man is given two basic tasks in the garden. And this is where Adam failed, actually. The two basic tasks that Adam was given with regard to the garden were he needed to provide and protect. All right, so Adam's responsibility was to tend the garden in such a way that he could provide for his wife, and he also had a responsibility to protect his wife, which when the serpent came, he did not do. All right, Adam had to be hard so that when the serpent threatened his wife, he would be able to step in between. Right? He basically any threat to my family or home has to come through me first.
Makes sense.
Now that in order to be like that, a man can't be a coward. He can't be soft. He has to be hard. He's got to be a warrior. He's got to be a fighter, and he doesn't take that fighting testosteronic belligerence and go home to fight with his wife.
Right.
He fights for his wife. He fights to protect her. He establishes a perimeter around the home. And in order to do that, he has to be hard.
Yeah, and I think you point that out as well. I think when you said that, you sort of made me think other aspects of what you what you were saying as well, because it's almost like you said that you don't want to be hard on your wife, or almost like so I guess some marriage will have this idea of like almost like a competition. Like there's a competition going on inside the home. Who can make the kids listen to who, and who can be more authoritative. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think you point this out in your book as well, where you're talking about how to deal with children. While one child will respond to the father in a more respectful tone, when he speaks to his wife, when a child speaks to his wife, is more not as respectful. Do you mind digging into that as far as how do we work in that area to ensure that there's not this level of competition? Men are loving their wives, and wives are respecting their husbands.
Yeah. So this came from a conversation that I had with a young husband at a conference once. And he was talking to me about how the kids mind him, but they don't mind his wife. And he was talking to me as though he was winning the game. Like, I'm ahead of my wife. I've got more points on the board than my wife does because the kids mind me. But that's like the right end, or the wide receiver thinking I'm winning this game because I've got 2 more touchdowns than the quarterback does. Right?
Yeah.
No, you're on the same team.
You're on the same team.
It doesn't make any sense. You're on the same team. So that means that when a husband sees the kids not minding his wife, that means that he's losing. He's not doing it well, because it's his responsibility, particularly with boys, who sometimes when they're 2 or 3 or 4 years old, they figure out that mom's a girl, and they don't like being told what to do by a girl. And they notice that, and so they start giving her grief. And so the dad should look at that, and he could say, son, when you're not obeying your mother, you're not obeying me. Whenever you are dealing with your mom, I want you to see my looming shadow right behind her. Because, son, mom and I are on the same team.
Yeah.
Right? We're all on the same team.
Yeah, and that just reminds me of the situation, like, because what my children try to do sometimes is like, if mommy says no, they'll come running to me and say, Daddy, can I have this? And I'm like, what did your mom say? She said no. I'm like, well, no. You know what I mean? So by the shadow, I love how you said that, the shadow that's standing behind the wife. You know what I mean? Even if you're not there, that's presence is still there. That authoritative presence is still there to back your wife up. You know what I mean?
When our kids were little, do what you just described, trying to play mom off of dad or playing dad off of mom. When our kids were little, that was a spanking offense.
Okay.
All right. So if you say, Mom, can I go out in the backyard? No, I'm about ready to put lunch on the table. Dad, can I go out and play in the backyard? If Dad hears that you just asked your mom that 30 seconds ago, that's a spanking, because you're in this house, you're not allowed to act like we're on different teams.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense.
Yes.
It would, like, honest with you, Pastor Doug, it'd probably be difficult for me to whoop them. It'd be difficult for me. I probably would just more like chastise them. Try to get on a case for doing that, because it's like you said, it's an obvious level of, like, you're trying to divide. That's your intention. You're trying to divide. You know what I mean?
Let me say something about that. Okay. All right. Because this is really important, because this is one of those things where my joke about illegalities probably comes in, because there are a lot of people, what about corporal punishment? What about discipline and so forth? In our family, we did spank. We did have spankings, but I think it'd be very safe to say that 95% of all the spankings happened when the kids were preschool,
Yeah.
when they were little, when they were little kids. Okay,
Yeah.
because that's where you establish you're establishing your authority there,
Yeah.
and it's quick and decisive, and it's over, and everybody's back in fellowship. Then when the kids are older, when they're 8, 9, 10 years old, almost always you can deal with things with a word, an exhortation, a caution, because you've already established your authority.
Yeah, yeah. And we spank our children as well, and I do find myself like my older one, she doesn't get as spanking as much, than the little ones. The little ones you
Right.
sort of, it's important that we do um supplant that understanding, you know what I mean, like
Right.
of authority, respect, respect your mother, respect your father, it's just that level of respect there. And with that comes the ability for, I guess, if your wife is not feeling as confident, she's able to feel that confidence from you, helping her
Right.
get through those areas of difficulty as it concerns.
And that's another area. That's another area where the husband can be hard for his wife.
Got
Right.
you.
His emotions are not going to be as invested. He's not going to be as tempted to take things personally when the kids act up. Sometimes mom can take it personally that they didn't do what she said, and dad's much less likely to do that. So he's a little more thick-skinned.
Interesting. So we have a question here. It was more of a comment, and I wanted to get your statement on this. Let me see if I can find it. It was. Let me pull it up real quick. Thought I had it here. Ah, yes, here it is. All right. So, a question from Prince Archive, I guess. Ask him how he would reconcile these things in light of his belief in wife submission. I believe here it is right here. I think this is the original question. In Reforming Marriage, Wilson says the husband can boss his wife around, but in how to exasperate your wife, he teaches that the wife is a dispositor
Despot.
of the house and can order her husband around. So, what do you think about that? Is that true, Pastor Doug?
Okay. The word despot there is the word that is used, that Paul uses, despotes. And so I believe those statements from Reforming Marriage and from How to Exasperate Your Wife harmonize. And they harmonize this way. The wife is the executive of the home. Right? So when I was in the Navy, I served in the submarine service. The captain was the captain of the ship, but every ship had an executive officer, the XO. And the captain was the final authority in the home, but the executive officer was like in a company, you've got the CEO, and then you've got the chief operating officer, the COO. My understanding is that God's pattern in marriage is that the husband is the protector and provider for the home, and he's the captain, the head of the house. But when it comes to the management of the house, like what goes in the dishwasher when, don't put paper plates in the dishwasher, mom says, right? Or since mom is the one keeping everything clean, she says, I really want everybody to kick your shoes off by the front door. Things like that. She's the executive of the home, and she's running the home. And that can happen without the husband relinquishing his headship or his authority. So if she says, let's say it's a rinky-dink kind of thing, where she's the one who does the grocery shopping, she stocks the fridge. I remember when our kids were teenagers and Nate was moving into the age where he would drink lots and lots of milk. Nancy's impulse was I just went to the store yesterday. I just bought that, limit the milk. And I said, no, our kids can drink as much milk as they want. And so I make an occasional decision as the head of the home. This is what we're going to do. But when it comes to the running of the house, that's her area of expertise. That's what she does. Now, she'll run if she thinks that I would have any question about something. Nancy runs it by me, but I believe that wifely submission is something we believe and practice. Mm-hmm. But in 43, coming up on 44 years of marriage, actually, might be coming up. We're coming up on 45. Sorry about that.
Oh, don't forget
45 years of marriage,
date, Pastor. Don't forget that date, man.
No, I know what day it. I know what day it is. I just don't know what number it is. So, coming up on decades of marriage, the instances where Nancy and I differed about something, and I made a decision, and she needed to submit to it. Has probably happened less than 10 times. Mm-hmm. Everything else is just ordinary life together, talking through, that sort of thing. Submission is assumed in everything we do. Headship and submission is assumed. But if you are having a showdown every other day, you're pointing to the Bible verse in Ephesians 5, and you've got bigger problems. You need to go get counseling.
Yeah, especially, I think it just draws back to the fundamental understanding that it cannot be two chiefs. It can't be a bunch of generals. It needs to be some followers. You know what I mean? Allow the man to lead. And I think that's the big problem, Pastor Doug, is that in today's culture, we see a lot of women who are, very confident in what they can do, and they're very confident, and we get it. You know what I mean? But I think there still needs to be that level of respecting their husband. Just that fundamental basic of respecting the husband. And I tried to,
because when the wife wears the pants, when the wife is wearing the pants, they're both miserable. The husband is miserable and the wife is miserable.
Mm. Yeah, and the individuals I talk to about this, when it comes to that, it immediately puts up a wall, because they the ladies that talking people who are married, they immediately put up a wall in saying that, thinking that I'm trying to have them be some kind of go back to caveman times or whatever it is, where the proverbial caveman is dragging his woman by the hair, you know what I mean? And that's not what I'm trying to express. I'm just trying to express that there needs to be some kind of authority there. There needs to be, allow the man to do what he's designed to do, how God's made him to lead. And I try to express to him that it just flows much better, as far as the marriage is concerned.
Exactly right.
And let me see and here's another statement here, and this is interesting. I think it's sort of diving into what we were talking about. I said, Pastor Doug, I hear what you're saying, and it seems like it would be practical in an ideal nation where the economy is good for things like this, but it does not seem ideal today.
Is he talking about a wife working outside the home?
I think so. Chuck, if you can clarify a little bit, I'll drop that out of it. But I think he was sort of, I think this question popped in when we're talking about the man being ahead of the wife and things like that. And I believe anyway.
Right. So if he's, let me just assume that he's talking about the wife working outside the home, because he says where the economy is good. Basically, when things are bad, this is one of the things I sometimes say as the pastor in counseling. I'll say, look, no situation is so bad, but that you can't make it worse. Mm. So obeying God's structure, obeying God's pattern for marriage is going to help you however difficult things are, right? If you're doing it God's way, it's going to be helpful to do it God's way. If things are going great in the economy and in the culture, living God's way is going to be under God's blessing. If things are challenging, if things are falling apart, then how much more do we need to obey God? The Bible doesn't say husbands love your wives when things are good. It doesn't say wives submit to your husband when things are good.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's, I think I have another question here. So I do actually, before we get to that question, I do want to transition to a more, more intimate aspects of a marriage, right? When it comes to sex,
Right.
sex.
Right.
How important is it that a women or just the married couple in general do not deprive themselves of being intimate,
I
intimate
would
with
say it's
each other?
very
Yeah.
important. Yeah, the marriage relationship is a covenanted sexual relationship. It's not all sex all the time, but sex is at the center, right? It's how the marriage is consummated. It's part of the definition of marriage. If a man and a woman haven't slept together, they're not married. The marriage is not consummated. And so I would say that Paul argues in 1 Corinthians 7 that it's important for husband and wife to be married and to be sexually active in order to resist sexual temptation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so the Bible teaches that there are different reasons for sex. One of them, and the Puritan and Reformed view hammered out three basic reasons for sex. One is union and communion, fellowship together. One is propagation, having children, reproduction, and the third is prevention of immorality. Okay, so if a wife won't sleep with her husband, they're trying to be married in a world where plenty of other women will. Now, if he strays, that's his sin, that's his adultery. He has no business doing that. But Paul says that this is a preventative. This is a preventative, and this is also a preventative when it comes to things like sexual temptations like pornography.
Yeah, and I think you pointed out also in your book that I remember. I think I distinctly remember saying, especially for men, that we need to be very careful when it comes to this stuff. Is there any reason why you said, especially men, or is it just that men are more prone to fall into these areas?
Well, it's really interesting. I think men are more. I think if you're talking about straying,
Yeah.
sexual straying, I believe that men are more prone to temptations like pornography, that sort of thing. And I believe that women are more prone, and I'm taking from 40 years of pastoral experience. Women are more vulnerable to the temptation of actual adultery.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. That's
Um,
interesting. Okay.
so when many times people assume that women are bulletproof when it comes to sexual matters, and that's just not simply not true. It's
Yeah.
it's that men are vulnerable in different ways. And I'm not saying that men don't cheat, and I'm not even saying that women don't have problems with porn. I'm just saying the ratios are different um, between them. And I'm also talking about Christian couples, like people who believe the Bible, who want to have a Christian marriage. I'm not talking about pagans with an open marriage. I'm not talking about lesbian marriages. I'm not talking about things like that. I'm talking about Christians who believe the Bible. Um, the man is almost certainly likely to have more temptations with pornography than his wife does. And the wife, if they've got a crummy marriage, if they're not running on all cylinders, she's going to be more vulnerable to someone at church who's nice to her, or a counselor who's thoughtful and listens, or that next door neighbor guy who got the lawnmower started, whatever.
Yeah, yeah, I hear what you're saying. That's interesting, though. That's a very interesting thing. I have another question here. Um, and this is from Jesus Archuleta. Thank you, Jesus, for the question. Doug, I've been talking to my elder about this issue, but I wanted to know your thoughts. I am in the talking stages with another woman. We have admitted how we felt about each other, etc. She does seem to go back to her commitment. She does seem to go back on her commitment a lot, though. I've seen a pattern of this. I've been more direct lately. How should I continue to handle this, or should I run?
Okay. So you should maybe run, but you should try something else first. Okay. When you say that you've been in the talking stages, talking headship leadership issues should be exercised here. In other words, if you want her to marry you, then ask. All right, don't talk about it to try to get the woman to show her hand first. Hey, I'll tell you how I'm thinking about you if you'll tell me how you're thinking about me. If she's wavering back and forth, uncertain, certain, uncertain, certain, it could be that she's just being unstable. That's one problem, possible problem. But it also could be that you're not being direct and definitive enough. So when you say there, I've been more direct lately, I think you should have your directness be something other than, hey, why are you going back and forth? I don't think it should be that. I think it should be, would you please marry me? Would you marry me?
I hope that helps, Jesus. Hope that helps. All right, cool. And I have another question here, and this is an interesting question as well. Christian Levin. It says, are marriages outside biblical Christianity honored by God? Should converts to Christianity renew their vows?
Great question. Yes, I believe that marriage is a common grace institution. So it's part of the fabric of the world. So if a couple become Christians, if they got married and they become Christians, they were, whatever form their vows took before, those are recognized by God, and it's not like they became Christians and then, hey, do you want to get married? Mm-hmm. No, if you renewed your vows, or if you have any obligation to continue, that means you were married in God's sight. So I believe that marriage in God's sight is contracted, is covenanted, when a public covenant is made and there's sexual consummation. When those two things have occurred, then a marriage has occurred. And then if the couple become Christians, they might want to, for symbolic reasons, exchange vows in a church or something like that. But it's not necessary in order to be married.
Okay. Christian, I hope that answers your question. And here's another question from Gene Robbins. Thank you, Gene, for the question. Since Paul did not get married and thus didn't have a partner to have relations with regularly, what do you think as a counselor, the counsel would have been on how to resist sexual sin?
Okay, so this is a great question. Also, you've got a bunch of great viewers here.
Yeah.
So Paul says that he has a gift from God. So I believe that there's a difference between being single and being gifted with celibacy. Being gifted with celibacy means that you are single and you're not distracted by sexual temptation. It's a special gift from God. When someone simply happens to be single and they're not gifted with celibacy, they're going to be distracted all the time. Sexual temptation is going to probably be the central element of many of their lives. All right. So if so many young Christian men who are not yet married, they think that sanctification consists almost entirely of getting control of their sexual appetite. And that's because they're single and have no lawful sexual outlet, but they're not gifted with celibacy. So Paul didn't have helpful pointers on how to stay out of sexual sin other than what is in Scripture generally, because he was uniquely gifted with that.
It's definitely a gift to be able to restrain oneself. By the power of the Holy Spirit is the only way you can restrain oneself from venturing off.
Right.
When you don't have regular relations. And this is a question, you talk about it briefly in your book as well, talk about birth control within marriage. My wife and I were on number 5, right? My wife is pregnant right now. She's 43 years old, and she's going to be due here in June. So this is my question to you. How do we go about that? Is birth control sinful? Because me and my wife would have these conversations, right? And then we will all people get their tubes tied, people get, their, I forget the name. They get all this stuff. Tubes tied, snipped, cut, birth control pills, what you call a depot shot, everything. What is your position on birth control, and should Christians do it? Christians use birth control.
So, my fundamental baseline conviction on this is the Bible doesn't say anything about it directly. All right. The only example of it in Scripture is Onan in the book of Genesis, and the problem there was that he was defrauding his brother from his brother's inheritance. So it was fraud was involved in it, and so you can't say that that's a pure example of birth control. It was a birth control. There was the instrument for him defrauding his sister-in-law and now his wife. Okay, so the Bible doesn't say anything directly about it. So I'm not going to say anything directly about it and say birth control is a sin or condoms are a sin or whatever. What I will say is this. The Bible teaches a lot about children. So children are a gift from God. Children are a blessing. And so if you came to our church and on a Sunday and you knelt down after the service and looked across the room, you would think that we had a rule against birth control because there are all those kids running around down there. But we don't have a rule against birth control, but we do have an emphasis on teaching and exalting the family, and children are good. They're a blessing. It's really good. So we do that. Then the next thing I would say, there's certain forms of birth control that are out for a Christian. If anything is an abortifacient designed to prevent the implantation of a fertilized egg in the uterine wall, if you're being inhospitable to a human being already conceived, then I think that that's unlawful. I think that's just simply
like the morning after pill. I believe that's what it's called. The morning after pill would be an example of that, right?
Correct. Right. And there's some argument. On my blog, I have a post called 11 Theses on Birth Control. And there's some debate also on whether the pill works that way also. Condoms don't work that way. Having tubes tied that doesn't work that way. So abortifacient birth control, I think, is unlawful for Christians. And if you have a young couple and they say something like, well, we're going to have 1.7 children so that we have something to put in daycare, and then we're going to pursue our dual careers.
Yeah.
I would say your problem is not birth control. Your problem is that you're listening to the world. You're worldly. You've got a worldly attitude toward children and family. You're not thinking biblically about marriage and family.
Yeah.
But let's say another couple comes to me and says, we just got married last year, and Bill here has a year left in grad school, and after that he's going to inherit his parents' ranch, and we're going to move out there and have 10 babies, Lord willing, But we're using birth control for the present, and we hope to have a big family. Now, I can't, even if I would make a different decision than they would in that instance, and I can't chastise them for being in sin because they've got a biblical attitude toward children, right? It's not the birth control device. It's the attitude toward marriage and family. Fruitfulness is good. That's the bottom line.
And that's that. I mean, me and my wife, like I said, we talk about this, and it always draws us back. Is like, are we not preventing God from doing what He wants to do? Like, if we take these measures to prevent a pregnancy, are we putting it in our own hands? You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't think that way. I wouldn't reason that way, because that's like sitting at the dinner table saying, if God wants me to have the mashed potatoes, then He can get them down here. Well,
yeah.
Well, that's true. That's true. But you don't hesitate to say, please pass the mashed potatoes.
Right,
God gives us agent.
Right.
We're supposed to exercise responsibility and agency in our lives.
Okay.
And
Okay.
and there are some instances where, let's say, a couple wants to have as many children as possible, and the doctor tells them, "Look, given your medical condition, you really ought to space your children every 2 years, right? You really need to pace yourself." And let's say the couple are using birth control so that they can have more children, not fewer children, because the doctor says if you have 3 in a row, then you're done, something like that. Okay, well, the issue is, are you willing to live God's way? Do you think families are great? Do you think kids are great? That's the thing.
All right. All right. So we have another question here from Mr. Monty Lane. Thank you for the question. Do you have to consummate marriage for the marriage to be valid? For example, if a spouse has a disability preventing consummation.
Yeah. Thank you, Monty, for picking up on that. I believe that an unconsummated marriage is not a marriage. Right. So I believe I believe the definition of marriage is a covenant and a consummation. And if you have consummation without a covenant, that's simply fornication or adultery. You've got consummation without a covenant, that would be sexual sin of some sort. If you have covenant but no consummation, then what you are is just roommates or friends. And now, if there's a disability, I have no objection. Let's say there's a man who is quadriplegic and he can't consummate the marriage, and he's got a dear friend from childhood who wants to live with him and be his friend forever. I don't have any objection to that, but I just don't think it ought to be called marriage. And you don't have the same concern about sexual immorality that you would have if a guy and a girl were living together and not doing anything. They said, you'd say, yeah, but you could, and one of these days it's likely. In this case, with a disability, it's not likely, right? You don't. So I just think it ought not to be called marriage.
Okay. And we have another question here. I've read quotes attributed to Doug by Sola Sisters where they quoted him saying, "You should practice church discipline if dishes are not done." Any truth to that quote, or is it out of context?
Two things. It's completely out of context. So that's the first thing. It's completely out of context. I wrote an article many years ago that I later took. Basically, I think people have misunderstood what I was saying, and that I took responsibility for how it was misinterpreted. In other words, that what I was talking about was a situation that pastors and healthcare workers and people sometimes run into, where the house is like a crazy cat lady's house, and you've got diapers everywhere and nothing picked up and nothing, so I was talking about a horrendous health-threatening, safety-threatening situation. And I was talking about how a husband in a situation like that should address it. But so I wrote that article maybe 20 years ago, and then somebody got a hold of it and started taking quotes from that article out of context. So I wrote a follow-up post saying, this misunderstanding is partly my fault. No, I don't believe that at all. So if life is happening in a house and the dishes aren't done, it's totally irresponsible to be talking about church discipline.
All right. And we have another question. This is coming from Willie Ramos. Doug Wilson, is marriage, divorce, and remarriage while first spouse is alive considered adultery?
Okay. This question comes from the Lord's teaching on it. And the answer is that it is not necessarily adultery, but that it frequently is. All right. So if a husband divorces his wife because he thinks his secretary is cuter, and he runs off with his secretary and marries her, Jesus says that that's adultery. It doesn't matter that the divorce paperwork went through. It doesn't matter that they got legitimately married the second time. Jesus says that it's tantamount to adultery. So if they ever want to get right with God, they've got to confess the sin of adultery. Right? So many remarriages are adulterous. The people are not concerned with making sure that they met the conditions that the Lord put on it. And Scripture puts two basic conditions. One is if your spouse was unfaithful, then the innocent party can divorce for grounds. And I think the innocent party is then free to remarry. And if a non-believer, in 1 Corinthians, if the non-believer deserts the believer, then I believe that it's the believer is not bound, Paul says, in such circumstances. But apart from those two exceptions, I believe that remarriage after divorce is adultery.
All right. Well, Doug, I don't want to hold you too much longer. I know you have some stuff to do, but I thank you, Pastor Doug, for coming on the Gospel Truth, man, and contributing to this platform with some solid information on reforming marriage, and helping get marriage back where it needs to be. You know, ain't that what reforming is? Going back to the foundation, man. We got to go back, man, and get things right, man. So I thank you, Pastor Doug, man. I appreciate all you're doing, man. Keep doing your thing, and perhaps we can do this again on a different subject matter. I thank you so much for joining me.
Great. Thank you. Blessings.
All right, God bless. All right, folks. Another great interview, and Pastor Doug is... I really like Pastor Doug, and this is why I like Pastor Doug. It's more of a personality thing about Pastor Doug that I like. You know, you have some individuals who are some theologians or some Christians who are very popular, and they're not just as popular as Pastor Doug Wilson is, and they're not willing to give their time, to relatively small platforms like mine. They will only go for the high hitters, right? The 100,000 subscribers or the 50,000 subscribers type shows. And while a lot of people disagree with Pastor Doug on certain things, they have their problems. I even heard people call Pastor Doug a heretic, Pastor Doug is solid, man, when it comes to this type of stuff, man. I've read through, I'd rather listen. I have it on audiobook. I'd rather listen to Reforming Marriage once all the way through, and then I've listened to it again about halfway through, or the first several chapters of it. And the information that's in there is solid. And while, this show is centered around debates and things of that nature, I really appreciate interviews like this. And I really appreciate guys like Pastor Doug Wilson taking his time when he doesn't have to. He's a very accomplished pastor. He's a very accomplished man in the faith. And he doesn't have to, right? He doesn't have to, but yet he does. And I think that shows that God did a great work in his heart, and that he's a humble dude, man. And I appreciate that about Pastor Doug. And we can have all the disagreements we want theologically with Pastor Doug, but the dude is humble, and I respect that, and I'm sure I don't agree with Pastor Doug on every single theological parameter, but the dude is humble. He's a brother in Christ, and I appreciate him for being so humble and willing to take his time out of his busy schedule to help us out, in areas that we need help in. In marriage is certainly an area that the body can always use help in, from men who've been through the labyrinth of marriage for many years. I think he said he's going on his 45th year anniversary coming up or something like that. So for us young guys, and young women out there, we need men like Pastor Doug to be able to step in and share that wisdom when it comes to marriage. And I hope you agree with me on that. But that said, I am going to close this thing out, and I thank everyone for joining us on this episode of The Gospel Truth. It's been great. And, as always, I want to encourage you to like and subscribe, man. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that bell, stay in the loop, because we have a whole bunch of shows on The Gospel Truth coming up, a whole bunch of debates. I hope you enjoyed the last show where I engaged with an atheist. That was pretty fun. I look forward to doing more shows like that. And the funny thing is that like right after the show, I got an email from one atheist, you know, talking about, oh yeah, I want to talk about the problem of evil and all this stuff and yada yada yada. And I'm like, man, get out of here, man. But it's all good, man. But I look forward to doing more of the type of shows, man. But once again, if you're new to this channel and you've checked out the content and you appreciate the content, hit that subscribe for me. You know, give a subscribe. And with that said, I'm going to get out of here. May God bless you. May God keep you. Gone.